got the housekeeping done. Let's move forward with some introductions. Basil's having some technical problems right now, so he'll be joining us. But I'm Warren Hirsch, Director of Quality Services at the IA. I spent 17 years on the Standards Board, 3 years on the Public Sector Committee, President of the Philadelphia chapter, former CAE of New Jersey Transit. Among other things I've done many quality assessments over the years in my professional services days, and of course I run that group here at the IA. Martin?
Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Martin Krobler. I'm director and partner for a private company based in Cape Town, South Africa, established in 2005, and I'm an experienced auditor with 25 plus years of private and public sector experience, focusing on EQAs as well as the development of internal auditors and relevant training materials for those auditors. I also am a past governor for the IA Western Cape and a member of and a chairman of various audit and risk committees down in Cape Town. My specialities are governance, internal auditing, risk management, quality, and through my involvement with the IA's Global Standards Board, topical requirements subcommittees, as well as the Internal Audit Vision 2035 task team, I'm trying to give back and drive the profession into the future. So I'm looking forward to working with everyone today.
Right, thank you. And hopefully Basil will join us soon. So our overview today is talk a little bit about why the standards matter. We'll give an overview of the global internal audit standards for quality, relative to quality. We'll provide some tips for successful implementation of the standards, and at the same time provide some common observations of quality assessment reviews that we've seen and some that we may see going forward in the future. So with that, let's talk a little bit about why the standards matter. So standards basically are a platform that all internal audit departments use as common ground. The minimum level of performance requirements are mentioned in the standards. Folks can always go above them. And it's the roadmap for how we do our work. As far as why they're important, the key thing on this slide is help audit to be viewed as value added. So with the new standards, as Martin will tell you, is that it's not only focusing on conformance, but performance as well. So the issue is really going to be, how do you demonstrate performance in quality assessments in your work with the new standards? And also, of course, they give you a reference point. They're a resource, and the bottom line in all this is really protect your department to be in full compliance with the standards should anything come up. Martin, you have anything else to add on that?
Sorry, Basil, I'm keeping myself muted on this side just in case. But no, at this stage, I just wanted to say that the adding value to your organization is probably one of the most important aspects that we are trying to build into the new standards, aligning it with the quality work that we are trying to produce for our organizations and helping them be successful. So I just want to emphasize that those points that you are making.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have our first polling question. Are you familiar with or have you read the new standards? And Martin will not get insulted. So please, you think we pulled it up? Here we go. Okay. Ooh. All right. Can we push those out? Wait to see if we can get those out. Okay, totally out. So interesting. We have a pretty good response of somewhat, and have read them. So Martin, I think your work is being fruitful. Everybody must have been on that webinar a few weeks ago. Any other comments on that that you'd like to add?
Warren, I'm just glad that at least about 90% of the people has at least seen the standards, and a lot of them have totally gone through them and hopefully have a great understanding of what they're all about. So it's time well spent over the past 3 years then for the entire Standards Board, and I think all of the Standards Board members will be happy to see these types of results.
Good. Well, you've done your work. Well, we usually have a pretty sophisticated audience for these quality assessment webinars, so you'd be happy about that. Okay, so new global internal audit standards for quality. Martin, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Warren. I'll just give you a heads up every time I'm done with the slide. I just want to give you a brief overview for those of you that have not seen the standards, for the 12% or so. But a brief overview of the new structure is that the standards now consists of 5 domains. The previous mandatory guidance that is, or the current mandatory guidance that's part of the IPPF, all of those mandatory elements has been consolidated into a new structure, and that structure consists of 5 domains, which is, and I'll get into those details in a moment, but it's the purpose of internal auditing and your ethics and responsibilities, your governing of the internal audit function, managing and performing. Those 5 domains, 4 of those domains contain specific principles that the standards wants us to achieve those principles through the conformance of the underlying standards. The 15 principles are underpinned by 52 standards, which consists of requirements, considerations for implementation, as well as examples of evidence of conformance. If you think back about our current implementation guides that we have, those implementation guides have been used to create the considerations for implementation and some examples for those evidences of conformance. Additional features that is also built into the new standards is the fundamentals of the standards themselves. The glossary that has been expanded quite significantly to give us a little bit more insight into what some of the jargon means within the standards itself, as well as applying a separate section on the application of the global internal audit standards in the public sector, and taking into account that there are aspects of public sector entities that is not always able to specifically follow the standards or conform to specific aspects of those standards. If we move on to the next slide, Basil, and this is probably just going to give you a little bit of insight into how the standards look. But what I want to focus on, in addition to the different domains and the principles that's in there, is that I've circled two of the principles overseen by the board in enhancing quality. Those are the 2 principles where quality is mostly focused on. The standards themselves, let's put it this way, the slide actually displays those 5 domains quite nicely, which comprises those 15 principles within domains 2 and 5. And if we think about the core principles as they currently are, which aimed to enhance performance, was added a little bit later on, but it aims to enhance performance based on the standards. They are now integrated and expanded on within these new standards themselves, effectively building performance into the standards. So it's not on top anymore, but built into the standards. And that's where the performance aspects comes in. The term quality, you'll see those within those specific principles and the underlying standards. The term quality is mentioned in the entire document a staggering 166 times, whereas in our current standards, it's only mentioned 18 times. If you look at the condensed standards without the considerations for implementation or those examples of evidence of conformance, it's still mentioned 66 times, and which is quite a lot of times that the term quality is being focused on. Even if we just look at those the foundational statement of the standards, it starts off to say that the global internal audit standards guides the worldwide professional practice of internal auditing and serves as a basis for evaluating the quality, evaluating as well as elevating the quality of the internal audit function.
Okay.
Warren, you want to add something on that?
No, I think you've laid it out pretty good. I didn't realize you had such detailed statistics on the...
I actually prepared a little bit prior to this session.
Okay, polling question number 2. Are you planning to conduct a gap assessment in anticipation of implementing the new standards? And you see the options there. Yes in 2024, yes in 2025 or beyond, maybe, no. Okay. I will give it another minute. So that's to wait to hear whether it's released yet. But anyway, so this is interesting because in quality services we're getting a lot of inquiries about doing gap assessments for a lot of companies in 2024 to prepare for 2025. So a lot of the inquiries we get, folks are doing the 2024 QA against the current standards, and at the same time they want us to do a gap assessment for the new standards. So some companies are taking that strategy. Other companies are accelerating, and we're going to ask that later, their QAs to 24 just to get it done and doing the gap assessment. And a few of our companies are just doing the gap assessment in 24 or early 25, and they want the QA done against the new standards. So that's sort of what we're seeing. It's early in the year, but those kind of strategies are things that companies are thinking through right now. Okay, next one. Okay, Martin.
Thank you, Warren. Yes, the polling results is as expected. I take it most of those maybes are still considering whether they want to do it in 24 or 25. I think the reason why the majority of people says yes, 2024 is because they want to be assessed against the current standards, not the new ones that will become effective on the 9th of January in 2025. But if we move on just briefly to the quality aspects of the new standards and where it specifically, the standards themselves specifically speaks about the quality ones. The first instance where you'll notice this is in domain 3, where the board oversight starts playing a big role in terms of governing the internal audit function. So principle 8 talks about your oversight by your board or your audit committees, whatever that might be. And it says that the board oversees the internal audit function to ensure the function's effectiveness. Now, there's 4 standards that plays a part in this principle itself of oversight by the board, and the first one is board interaction, and that just briefly talks about the interaction between the board and the internal auditors, as well as or the internal audit function, as well as senior management within your organizations. The second one talks a bit about the resources itself, and I'll get into quality and external quality assessments in a moment. I just want to briefly take you through what the details of that principle is, and it states that board oversight is essential to enable that overall effectiveness of your functions itself. Achieving this principle requires that collaborative and interactive communication between the board, as well as the CAE, as well as the board support in ensuring the internal audit function obtains sufficient resources to fulfill that internal audit mandate. That links to 8.2. Additionally, the board receives assurance about the quality, that's 8.3, of the performance of the chief audit executive and the internal audit function through that quality assessment and improvement program, including the board's direct review of the results of 8.4, the external quality assessment. Now, if we can move on to the next slide, Basil, thank you. This one focuses on standard 8.3, the quality standard, where a little bit more detail about how the board provides oversight on the quality of the internal audit function and the effectiveness and efficiency of the internal audit function comes about. And it tries to give that indication that the CAE, well, it's obviously the responsibility still of the CAE, but with essential conditions from a board perspective as well as a senior management perspective, that the CAE must discuss with the board as well as with senior management the frequency and the scope of quality assessments and any action plans and corrective actions for the internal audit function that then might be needed in order to improve and enhance your effectiveness of your internal audit function. The aspects that will be considered for conformance include the internal audit function's contribution to the organization's governance, risk, as well as their control processes, productivity and cost efficiencies, as well as relationships with stakeholders. And elsewhere in the standards, you might have noticed, and for those that have just browsed it, that there's a big emphasis on communication and stakeholder relationships as well throughout the standards in order to enhance that value proposition of internal audit. This 8.3 also mentions your quality assurance improvement program documentation that must be maintained to demonstrate the effective processes within the internal audit function. So again, from that board oversight function is not merely a board that sits and oversees internal audit. It requires intensive collaborations and communications between internal audit, your boards, as well as your senior management team within your organizations.
Getting there, hold on.
No worries.
This technology is working. There we go. We're good.
Here we go. The second standard that focuses specifically on quality is our external quality assessments, and where it currently is let's say under the control of the chief audit executive. This has been elevated a little bit to say that this is actually something that the board needs to take seriously, and that the CAE needs to discuss and coordinate this with the board as well as with senior management in terms of the requirements of a quality assessment, the timing that needs to happen. I mean, if the board wants to see, if there's enhancements that needs to be made within the internal audit function, the board might want more frequent quality assessments than the required 5 years. So the timing as well as the scope of an EQA need to be discussed with the board. Those aspects requires the review as well as the approval by the board itself. Other things that needs to be taken into consideration is that, again, in consultation and communication, there must be assurance that the qualification of the assessment team is considered by considering the assessor's knowledge of the standards, their previous external quality assessment experience, because you want to benchmark against other organizations, what other internal audit functions are doing, as well as whether the team that is going to perform your external quality assessment has taken an recommended quality assessment training. There is also a new requirement within the standards that at least one team member of the assessment team must hold the certified internal auditor credentials. At the end of the day, the external quality assessment, the results of that external quality assessment must be reported to the board directly by the EQA team. Obviously, there's communication with the CAE, but in order to enhance that independence of the EQA, the results is directly reported to your boards.
Okay. Hold on. Okay. Here's next polling question. If your EQA is due in 2025, will you accelerate it to 2024? And I talked about that briefly before, but now let's see what the results are. Okay. Okay, so this is pretty consistent with what we're seeing. a lot of folks that we're talking to are accelerating into 20 to 24. And there's a big undecided out there. But the key thing is, I don't know why folks are not planning to conduct an EQA. Because technically, without an EQA, you're not in conformance with the standards. But that's another issue, I think, for another webinar. Anything to add? And Basil's back, and we'll have him introduce himself in a little while. Martin, Basil, you have any other comments on the results here?
Just a little technical mishap there. No, I think the one thing that surprised me is not planning to conduct an EQA, because that requirement hasn't changed. So I think we just need, as professionals, we just need to keep pushing that as something that is good for our internal audit functions.
So Basil, while you're working, why don't you give us a brief introduction of yourself? Because you were fixing it while we were doing that. Then we can move forward.
Sure. Sorry about that. I've been doing quality assessments for a long time. I wrote the current manual. And I provided some draft language for the new proposed manual that'll be coming out sometime in 2024. I think in quality assessments about getting better, and I think everyone should take advantage of that, and I'll provide some more comments when we get into some of the things that we should be looking for, not just what we find in QAs, but also what we are anticipating, some of the impacts of the new standards they have upon the quality process. So I'm glad to be able to share some thoughts with you, and it's been a fun journey. So thank you, Warren.
Okay, thanks, Basil. I'm glad you paid your internet bill, so you're back. Okay.
It wasn't the internet; it was the computer itself.
Oh. Okay, Martin.
I think it is back to me. Thank you, Warren. Yeah, also interesting. I would have loved to get an understanding of why some internal audit functions are not conducting an EQA, but like you mentioned, we might need a separate webinar for that discussion because it could be a long one. Moving on, so we are at principle 12. We're moving away from the oversight by the board. So just as a summary, there are certain functions that will help an internal audit function itself become more effective and efficient. And one of the essential things is that board support and the oversight by the board, and them also focusing on the quality aspects and the performance aspects of the internal audit function. And we'll get into the internal assessments and the quality assurance and improvement program in a moment. But the board needs to provide us internal auditors with that type of support to get to a level where we can help an organization be more successful. It's not something that we can do in isolation. So if we look at the next slide, or the next principle where quality plays a big role, it's actually principle 12, talking about, an entire principle, talking about enhancing quality of the internal audit function. And the domain, it falls under the domain 4, managing of the internal audit function. It consists of 3 standards, and I'll go into a little bit of detail with regards to those 3 standards in a moment, but I just quickly want to take you through, again, what this principle itself says. It says that the CAE is responsible for the internal audit function's conformance with the global internal audit standards, as well as the continuous performance improvement of the functions themselves. Quality is a combined measure of conformance with the global internal audit standards, as well as with the achievement of the internal audit function's performance objectives. And performance objectives, you'll see performance measures 12.2. It's one of the standards again. Therefore, a quality assurance and improvement program, similar to the one that you might have, but a little bit expanded. I just lost my place there. Therefore, a quality assurance and improvement program is designed to evaluate and promote the internal audit function's conformance with the standards the achievement of those performance objectives, as well as that pursuit of that continuous improvement. The program includes internal as well as external assessments, which now falls under domain 3, which is the board oversight principle as well. The CAE is responsible for ensuring that the internal audit function continuously improves. This requires the development of criteria as well as measures to assess that performance of internal audit engagements, the internal auditors as well as the internal audit function as a whole. These measures form the basis for evaluating the progress towards the performance objectives.
Okay.
Here we go. Which takes us into the first standard within this Principle 12, which is your internal quality assessments. And the internal audit function here in the CAE is required to establish documentation that monitors your day-to-day audit activities that's incorporated into routine policies and practices. So in essence, what an internal audit function should do is to make these quality checks part of the processes. It's not something that needs to be built on or should be built onto a process, because that slows the process down. You want it to be a seamless integration where you do your work and you check your quality and you report on those quality checks on an ongoing basis. Periodically, you need to do self-assessments, which is a more comprehensive method to assess your conformance with all of the standards that's addressed, and should also evaluate performance through such means. What we need to take into account whenever we go through these standards is that our goal is, yes, our goals are to conform to our standards, but our ultimate objectives is to achieve the outcomes of our principles as well. So if we achieve those outcomes, it should relate back to performance. Communication of the results of our internal quality assessments to the board and senior management is a requirement of our standards, and it links to open communication and telling our senior managers and our boards that, yes, we have got improvements that we want to make within our internal audit function, and we continuously want to grow and develop our internal audit function in order to be able to add more value to our organization at the end of the day. There we go. Performance measurement. Thank you very much, Warren. So standard 12.2 talks about the performance measurements and the metrics that we need to develop in order to measure what we're achieving and how we go about achieving those things. In terms of our performance measurements, it's obviously something that's developed by the internal audit function, but with consideration of input from our boards as well as our senior managers to discuss their expectations and their needs as well, and build those things into our performance measurements. The metrics that we use, both qualitative and quantitative, should be tailored to the organization's requirements by considering our charter, our strategic plan, and specific objectives that can be monitored on an ongoing basis. One size does not fit all, because our organizations are each to each own. Our organizations have got their own objectives. They've got their own way of doing things. So our performance metrics is, although there will be similarities, obviously, across internal audit functions, a number of those metrics will be tailored to our specific organizations. Action plans for issues and improvement. While we continuously monitor those things through our internal assessments, action plans for the issues and improvement opportunities should be tracked by the Chief Audit Executive, and those improvements and enhancements and the progress must be communicated to our board and senior management again. The last standard that falls under this principle of enhancing quality is that oversee and improve engagement performance, where it's kind of looking at what we've done and what we need to do going into the future, and then how are we going to improve that performance. So the CAE, and this is part of our ongoing day-to-day internal audit activities. So the CAE, or an engagement supervisor, must provide internal auditors with guidance throughout the engagement. Verify work programs are complete and confirm audit working papers adequately support findings, conclusions, as well as recommendations if there are any. And to assure quality, the CA must verify whether the engagements are performed in conformance with the standards and internal audit functions methodology. So it's very much aligned to that supervisory function that we have within our current standards that's still active. To develop competencies, the CA must provide internal auditors with feedback about the performance, as well as opportunities for those internal auditors to improve on a continuous basis. So basically, the supervision is about developing the internal audit staff, and when you develop those staff members and you grow those staff members, then your internal audit function itself will also improve at the end of the day.
Okay. Okay.
That is me for now.
Thanks, Martin. The question came up in the Q&A is when will the tools be out for the new standards? Now, if you go into the reference section, there's two things that have been issued recently. One is the mapping from the old standards to the new standards. And the other thing in there is the latest version of the Insights to Quality, which has a lot of the points that Martin made. So that's available for you as a summary. But Martin, is anything else coming out that you're aware of in the near future relative to the new standards and quality assessments?
Well, there's a task force that has been set up for the redevelopment of the quality assessment manual or guidance, and that will be developed over the course of the next couple of months and will be it will be released later on the year before the standards become due. There's no specific time at this stage, but we're hoping for not too late in the year. I also saw a question on the gap, the alignment between the old standards and the new standards. And as you've rightly mentioned, there's a link to that in the resources that was just released yesterday, so that everyone can see how the mapping works from the old standards to the new standards and vice versa. And in terms of the guidance for quality assessments, that guidance, there's plans to include checklists and documentation in there in order to assist with the transition to the new standards.
So they're working on it, and like Basil mentioned, he wrote with Keith Kale the initial draft that the task force is going to be working with. So stay tuned on that. And I think there's other things they're working on as well as some guidance on self-assessment and things like that. So stay tuned. Stay tuned to the website, and you'll be getting a notice of all that is coming up. So the next section is we're going to talk a little bit about the keys for successful implementation. Now, this is based on a book that Burton Anderson and Andy Dale wrote that provides great guidance on the 10 tips. And we use this as a starting point. And then from here, we'll talk about some of the things and primary observations and actually getting the expert opinion from Basil. I think he's still there. But raise your hand. Yeah, Basil's so
I'm still there.
Now, Urton was one of the original authors of the new standards, and I served with Andy on the standards board way back. So these are some of the best minds in the standards. So anyway, number one, align with key stakeholders. So some of the things they're recommending here is build strong relationships with your audit committee and key stakeholders. Just keep in mind that your key stakeholders may not be the senior management in your organization. They could be people maybe at the middle level that have a lot of influence. So you need to be aware of those folks too and build those type of relationships. Next piece is the charter. Make sure that it really is accurate to what your expectations are with your audit department, and promote key relationships as a day-to-day thing. So Basil, what are some of the things that you have to add to that as far as the stakeholders go?
Yeah, let me answer that two ways. First of all, things that we normally see related to this topic when we do QAs, and then just a few thoughts in terms of things to be mindful of for 2025 and beyond. I think, some of the more common observations that we have is that, while internal audit charters are in place, they may not, appropriately document the functional reporting relationships as an example. We do find a failure in many cases that the charter doesn't have the recognition of the mandatory elements of the IPPF. But that, by the way, is not a requirement in the new standards, so that ought to help. I think looking forward to 2025, it's going to be really critical that organizations take a hard look at their internal audit charter, because the roles of the chief audit executive and the internal audit function are going to be expanded a little bit. I think that the requirement to be able to demonstrate the internal audit charter, the oversight by the board, the relationship with the board, the senior management of the organization. It's going to be important to be able to demonstrate that within the context of the internal audit charter. I think Warren touched on it. Building relationships with stakeholders is actually called out in the 2025 standards. So, some of the successful practices that we currently see are involving not just the chief audit executive and board and senior stakeholder interaction, but also members of the senior leadership team and even the whole internal audit function as a whole. So, I think that just the whole documentation and demonstration is going to be increasingly important as we look into 2025.
Mark, do you have anything to add?
Not at this stage, Warren. Sorry, the signal was a bit bad, so I struggled to hear what Bez was saying, but I'll look at what's going on. Thanks.
Well, one of the things I would add, Basil, is that when I've been working with various departments over my professional services life, it's one of the things I would recommend is that they put in the charter things that they're not responsible for. Make it very clear that there's things in there, so it's very clear laid out, because you know what happens when something goes wrong, then they start looking at everything. So that's the only thing I would add to that. Okay, get and develop the right resources. So, like any professional team, you either grow your own or you acquire them through free agency. So, also the key point here is don't be afraid to outsource or co-source. At New Jersey Transit, we basically co-sourced IT work. We co-sourced some fraud work because we had a lot of fraud. Anyway, so the point here is that, and actually in some of the work we do, we see a lot of co-source resources. So Basil, anything here?
Yes, I would emphasize the fact that you want to make sure that your resources line up not just from a number standpoint, but from a skills and competencies standpoint as you look to address your requirements in the plan. I think using tools such as an internal audit competency framework it is important, not just to help you manage that process, but also to be able to demonstrate that you have met the requisite requirements. I would say many, if not most, organizations that we look at have some aspect of co-sourcing involved within their internal audit resource plan. I think a commitment to continuing professional development is critical and will continue to be critical. So that's what I would add in this area, Warren. Anything else, Martin or Warren?
Basil, completely agree with you. Now you've got that section that talks about the governance of the internal audit function, your resource support from board and senior management as well. So you've got that approach there as well from an internal audit perspective. And like you say, our internal audit functions very rarely has got all of the skills necessary to cover every aspect of an organization, and sometimes even some of the key risks within an organization. So that it's common practice to get skills from outside and co-source those types of aspects.
Now, a question that comes up is, and we see this in some of the folks that we talk to, if you're just a CAE and you outsource the whole operation of your department, the question comes up is who's responsible for the compliance with the new standards? So I can give the answer, Martin, unless you want to do that. The company is responsible no matter whether you outsource the operation, 100%, but there still needs to be accountability in the company for compliance with the standards to be totally in conformance. I'm sorry, Martin. Anything you want to add on that point?
No, you're 100% right, Warren. It's the responsibility lies with the organization, and in most cases, the organization will delegate or appoint a CAE that responsibility is delegated to from a board perspective. So you cannot outsource these responsibilities to an outsourced company. You need to make sure from inside the organization that all of the elements and the conformance requirements of the standards is adhered to, and that you eventually and ultimately achieve your principles in that regard. And you also see some of those aspects contained within the governing the internal audit function, where those essential conditions lies with the board as their kind of responsibilities.
So, Basil, I have a question for you. So, if someone is in that situation, do we expect to see an audit committee charter and a department charter in that situation?
We would expect to see an audit committee or a board level charter, whichever committee or organization has responsibility for oversight. We would expect to see a charter there, even though it's not a requirement of the standards. But it's an absolutely good practice to make sure that the internal audit charter and the audit committee charter, if you want to refer to it, or the board charter, align in terms of being consistent with how they describe that oversight responsibility. I think many times we see the audit committee charter to being at a very high level, and they may not really describe what actually happens. Such as review and approval of the internal audit charter, or review and approval of the replacement or hiring of the chief audit executive, and vice versa. The internal audit charter might be more precise or less so than the audit committee charter. I think it's just a good practice to make sure that both charters accurately reflect what's actually happening, and that what's actually happening meets the requirements that are embedded within the standards.
Okay, thank you. All right, next one. Okay, continue to improve, and I think we covered that. It's definitely in the standards now, but again, be proactive, embrace the quality, the spirit of the EQAs, and also have embedded practices to deliver quality work. So, Basil, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think I mentioned that in my introduction that I firmly believe that quality is about getting better, and that the internal assessment component is really, I think, what drives some of those getting better concepts. The ongoing monitoring of performance is something that's emphasized within the new standards. I think using a balanced scorecard to be able to monitor and report, I think it's critical in my mind to solicit the input of key stakeholders, including the board, in terms of determining which performance indicators are going to be put into place for the organization. I think periodic internal assessment should be done on an annual basis or even more frequently, and it ought to not just look at conformance with the standards and the internal audit charter, if you will, but also identify opportunities to get better. You might even do that through peer reviews or peers with your interaction with peer organizations to see if they're doing something a little bit different and better. So, I think the quality process, provides an opportunity for you to always, look to get better. But I think the external assessment, gives you sort of that, at least every 5-year look, but it's really the internal assessment piece, the ongoing monitoring, the reporting of that, as well as the periodic internal assessment that really drives continuous improvement.
Okay. Martin, anything to add on that?
Warren, I just want to add to that the internal assessments and your ongoing monitoring and everything is driven by your quality assurance and improvement program. And what you see a lot with when you do EQAs, I'm sure you've come across this as well, Basil, is an QAIP is developed for an organization by an internal audit or for an internal audit function. And it just stays the same document going into it. It never gets updated or really reviewed or relooked. And if you want to continuously improve, you need to take into considerations changes in the profession, changes in the environments and your industries and those things. And all of those aspects needs to inform your QAIP. So your QAIP needs to become a kind of a live document in terms of your performance mechanisms, and it needs to be continuously and consistently updated with the new achievements or new objectives or new goals that you want to achieve.
Yeah, Warren, let me add one additional thought there. I think looking forward into 2025, there's some activities that all internal audit functions ought to be doing. I mentioned one earlier in terms of everybody needs to be taking a look at their internal audit charter in terms of updating that to make sure it's consistent with the new requirements that are embedded within the standards. I think, consistent with what Martin just said, everybody ought to be looking at their QAIP to make sure that it aligns with the standards and incorporates, the enhanced emphasis on performance. And I think, we have, I don't think we've used the term yet, but I think the concept of quality equals conformance plus performance is something that ought to be a cornerstone of all our QAIPs. And we'll touch on the third piece a little bit later, but I think everybody ought to be actively working on a meaningful and insightful strategic plan for internal audit that addresses not just the requirement of the standards, but that will help them prioritize initiatives to be ready to go for 2025.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, polling question number 4. Do you feel your internal audit function has an effective QAIP in place? Yes, somewhat. Working on it? No way. Okay. Okay. So we'll push that out. Well, there's still a bunch of people that say no, but it looks like people are either working on it or there's a big percentage of yes. Martin, Basil, any comments?
Yeah, I would say this response doesn't surprise me. I think some elements are in place. If organizations are lacking something, it's usually differentiating between ongoing monitoring of performance and periodic internal assessment. I mean, one being, how do we assure we have, quality on an audit by audit basis? And the second being, are we in conformance with the standards and how do we continue to get better? I think, documentation and being able to demonstrate the QAIP is critical. And again, the documentation of a QAIP supports consistency in how it's done, but also sustainability in terms of future periods as well. So,
okay, Martin, anything on this?
Yeah, I agree with you again, Basil. And one of the things that I find missing a lot on a QIP is those performance measurements. And a lot of internal audit functions only uses the template that was provided by the Institute and customized that a little bit to their own organizations, and then they've got their QIP, but it misses those elements or those metrics that's necessary to measure your internal audit function on an ongoing basis in terms of your ongoing monitoring as well as in terms of your periodic assessments.
Well, one thing I can add is that the complex piece of this is how do you demonstrate performance? So the QAIP is really one element of that. So that really should be pretty clear on what you're measuring to demonstrate performance. But that's only a single element. There's others as well. So thank you guys for your input. Okay, deliver value. So what does value mean to your key stakeholders? And we said before, it's different every place, as I think Martha mentioned before. And then you have to plan to deliver value in every engagement. So one of the things that we used to do is you measure back to each audit why it's important, what risks are they going to be addressing, and also how is it going to add value to the organization. Of course, we talked about measurements, internal and QAIP, and communicate the value delivered back to the key stakeholders, I guess especially to the audit committee who's paying your salary. Go ahead, Basil.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is understanding what is the definition of value? What does it mean? And you can't do that unless you have relationships and discussions and throughout the organization, not just with the board and the audit committee, but also with your senior stakeholders. And that's sort of at a top level, but even at an organization or an individual audit level, it starts with communicating up front. What are the expectations? How can we deliver value? It's not just checking the box in terms of are we conforming to the standards, but are we really giving something incrementally that's really helping us out? And I think that I touched on it earlier, but a strategic plan can help you with that. Bottom line, it's getting the input and having the relationships with the key stakeholders that really impact all of that. So that's my thoughts there.
Okay, great. And if we have another polling questions, are we on the screen now?
Warren, your screen just disappeared. So your shared screen, I'm not sure if it is. No, it's still there. It's just on stage that it's disappeared. So don't worry about that. I just want to add to what Basil said as well in terms of communication and stakeholder relationships. I think next to the focus on quality that's so much more prevalent in the 2025 standards, is probably second. A close second is probably communication and the amount of focus that there is on building those stakeholder relationships, not only when you're auditing, but also during the course of a day or a week or a month, during the course of business. Getting to know your stakeholders, what their needs are and what their expectations are, which is something that is kind of a gap in the current standards. That those requirements has never been there, and I think that is going to make a huge difference on how internal audit functions, as well as the organization. The internal audit function sees a business and how an organization sees internal audit.
And I would just add, to the extent possible, the value should be defined in the charter somewhere, as far as what the expectations are, or some other document, so that it's clear what that means. Okay, we have another polling question. I think it's open already. Hold on. Okay, there should be a polling question out there. Does your QAIP address performance of the internal audit function? Yes. Define metrics, monitoring, partially defined metrics, limited monitoring and reporting, informal, done on ad hoc, or no. So I'm just checking to see whether our poll is up.
Yes.
Okay, we're good. Okay.
It is up there.
I'm just not seeing the results.
So it's about 37% yes, 38% partially, 18% informal, and 6% no. I think that this pretty much matches with what I see in QAs. Bottom line, the balanced scorecard is a great way to be able to demonstrate and monitor and report performance. Other ways that I've seen it are maturity frameworks, related to how effectively we're achieving principles of internal auditing. But frankly, balanced scorecards incorporated into the periodic reporting to the board is really the best way to go here on an engagement by engagement basis.
Warren, have you seen anything different or anything to add on that?
100% agree with the balanced scorecard approach, and I'm also a big supporter of that. I don't see it used very often. I would like to see it used more widely in internal audit functions, and that is one of the recommendations that is prevalent in my QA reports on an ongoing basis.
Okay, great. Again, like I said, demonstrating performance is a very complex thing. So a balanced scorecard is one way to get there. Okay, number 5, manage internal audit strategically. So are you involved in strategic initiatives? Do you have a seat at the table? That's an important one. So if something's big, are you there? Addressing the organization's key strategic and emerging risks up front in the beginning, and whether you're consulted or not. And then don't let major risks go uncovered. So you don't want to let anything fester out there. You want to provide guidance or raise the issues up and make sure that they get resolved as best possible. So Basil, number 5, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, from what we see currently, first of all, strategic planning isn't a requirement of the current standards. It is a requirement of the new standards. So for those chief audit executives and internal audit functions that don't have a strategic plan in place, you will need to get one to be in conformance with that aspect of the standards in 2025. I think, to echo, some of the thoughts that we've had previously, internal auditing strategic planning should not be done on an island. You really need to have the understanding and perspective of your key stakeholders. You need to make sure that an internal audit strategic plan is aligned with the organization's risks and objectives. I think that the most effective underlying piece of work that I've seen to support strategic planning is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or SWOT analysis. It really helps you to identify and prioritize initiatives for the plan. You want to make, you don't want to have 20 initiatives because I think you lose focus. But I think organizations, typically will have, if they have five to six initiatives that they're working on at any point in time, I think that's helpful. I personally believe that a 3-year rolling plan is good, sort of short-term, medium-term, long-term, in terms of addressing things. I think it's important to be able to identify performance metrics within a strategic planning initiative, and then monitoring and reporting, where you stand in relationship to getting things done. There should be nothing in a strategic plan that's not important for improving the internal audit function and aligning them with the organizations and addressing risk. I mean, bottom line, that's what it's all about.
Okay. Morgan, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely, Basil. It's you're spot on with everything that you've said, and I cannot see how an internal audit function can, looking at the new standards and the purpose of the new standards to enhance or to strengthen an organization's ability to create, protect, and sustain value. You won't be able to do that if you don't have a seat at the table. And very much in favor of the idea of a strategy which must be aligned to that of an organization strategy. If you're not part of those discussions, if you're not part of those sessions, then you won't exactly know where the organization is going or what the big issues are around the table that the organization is facing, or just maybe one of the stakeholders are facing. So this is a fantastic change to the new standards that will drive internal audit going into the future.
So I just want to add one thing based on my SOX days. Remember the old adage, it's not a control unless it's documented. So anytime a quality assessment would be performed, all these things need to be documented. You just can't say we have this. There's got to be documentation of the plan, documentation of the scorecard, documentation of all this stuff. So I just want to make that point. I'm sure you guys made it already, but it came to my mind about the old SOX thing about it's not a control unless it's documented.
Yep.
So in a quality assessment, unless there's documentation of the communication, all this stuff, it really is not there. Okay. Proactively assess your organization's risk management. So this is working in concert with the organization to make sure the risk assessment and the ERA, if you do that, is lined up and not on separate silos. Engage the other folks that do that kind of stuff in your company and actively have them participate in the ERA, risk assessment, and also have a positive impact on the organization with communication and guidance and things like that. So, Basil?
Yeah, I would add the following things, Warren, to that. I think that internal audit at all levels, not just the chief audit executive, but others throughout the organization, need to have the right seat at the table. Risk assessment needs to be done at a high level, but it also needs to be done effectively at an engagement level. So, just the concepts of risk management need to be, embedded within the operating culture of internal audit. I think that, the internal audit function, needs to periodically look at how risk is managed within the organization. And, from a coordination standpoint, to the extent that second line function, risk management, effectively, deals with some aspects of risk. Internal audit might be able to rely upon it, but you don't know that unless you understand, what's being done and how effectively, it's being done. So if you haven't looked at risk management within your organization, you really ought to. I think the third point I would make is that, risk assessment can't just look at SOX. It can't just look at other financial controls. It really needs to be comprehensive. It needs to look at operational risks. It needs to look at IT risks, strategic risks, and that's the only way that in my mind that you can appropriately prioritize ultimately where you draw the line within your strategic plan. And then the last point I would make is that assurance mapping is something that in my mind is very critical to be able to demonstrate the coordination of risk management coverage across the organization, who's doing what between the three lines. And organizations that I've worked with that have really gone through a good mapping exercise sometimes get surprised in terms of, wow, we have everybody and their neighbor looking at this aspect, but we're nobody's looking at this risk. So I think it's an important exercise to go through with the second and first line stakeholders as appropriate, but you need to be able to demonstrate how risk is being managed across the organization.
Hey, Martin, anything?
Thanks, Warren. If you will be so kind as to let me speak first next time, then I might have a lot to add or more.
Okay.
Just kidding. Just kidding. I just want to say again, in agreement with what Basil obviously says, but in order to assess organizations' risk management and governance processes, there's a new standard, again, 9.1, that talks about understanding, getting an understanding of the organization's governance and risk management processes. You cannot assist if you don't understand. And there's sometimes gaps in terms of internal audit functions, having a good understanding of what an organization's governance and risk management processes are like. Placing reliance on risk information without properly assessing the risk management processes, understanding the maturity of risk management in the organization. And that links again to that coordination 9.5, I think, standard that talks about the first and second lines of assurance within the organization, and leveraging that in order to be able to provide your boards with better oversight on your control environment, key controls and key risks that could impact the achievement of your organizational strategies. So that linkage that comes from the top down to the lowest level of the organization is of critical importance, and understanding how that impacts everything that happens in the organization, and the integration of that needs to come through in the plans of the internal audit function and the strategies.
Okay, so the next one we have is striving for excellence, embrace technology. Are there leading IA practices that can benefit your company and your department? And use the power of technology to develop leverage. So, Martin, I'll give you the first shot from a QA perspective. What are some of the things that you may see? And then we'll have Basil add his thoughts.
Sounds good.
Thank you for that, Warren. It is one of those areas within organization that I think that I come across very often that is leveraged it's limited. The use of technology and internal audit is very limited in most cases. The leveraging of data analytics techniques and AI processes in order to assist with achieving your internal audit functions or the internal audit engagement objectives are very limited in use. In most cases that I come across in South Africa, people are very much focused on the tried and trusted paper type or tick box type of approaches in order to get to an ultimate assessment. And I don't think those are the most effective and efficient ways that internal audit can help an organization and help management to achieve their objectives. They still make use of manual sample selections, selecting a sample of 30 or 50 out of 1 million or 2 million or 5 million or 10 million, and trying to push that off as a reasonable assurance. And the leveraging of technology is of extreme importance in order to enhance the quality of services that internal audit functions can deliver at the end of the day.
Okay, Basil, what can you add from the QA?
Yeah, so I would add the following. I think that I see most organizations addressing technology within internal audit itself, and I would say a majority of the sizable majority of the organizations are using some form of electronic work papers with in terms of what they're doing to manage the documentation and workflow within the internal audit function. I think it's somewhat dependent upon size and industry. I think, as an example, financial industries tend to be a little bit more use technology a little bit more effectively than some other industries. Small organizations tend to be more manual, or they may use file share or some aspect to do what they're doing. But I agree with Martin in terms of being able to leverage sample selection, using technology, sampling techniques, just dealing with it on an engagement by engagement basis, I think is important. I think there ought to be a step in every single planning process that you have as you're working on your methodologies to address technology and how you're going to incorporate it. But I think what I like about electronic tools and technology within internal audit, not just from a computer-assisted audit techniques, but also from data management, engagement management, is that it provides consistency, it provides sustainability of the methodology in the process, and you're able to, more easily, in my mind, demonstrate some of the oversight, the supervisory review and approval of key aspects of what you're doing. And demonstration, is critical in terms of an external assessment, but also, to assure yourself that things are being done the way they're supposed to be done.
Great. Thank you. All right, next. Make your words count. So, talking about keep it short, get right to the point. Also, educate of your stakeholders on risk and controls. We used to do that when I was at New Jersey Transit. We had a set presentation to educate our clients on what risk is and what control is. And in those presentations, we never use the word risk or control because a lot of our constituents don't really understand what that is. So we did it that way. Develop ongoing communications with management, periodic reports, maybe something like that, the board, and systematic trending information that could be valuable to the stakeholders. And so, Martin, anything to add that you've seen on QAs for this topic?
Muted again. Sorry, speaking to myself. I already mentioned earlier on about the communication strategy and the stakeholder engagement strategy that is now a requirement, and obviously communication that is second to quality, that's been enhanced now, new standards, focusing so much on how we communicate, what we communicate, when we communicate, and also how we build those relationships with our stakeholders in order to understand what their needs are and what they want. It's not necessary for one size. It's obviously there's no one size fits all. So if you have those stakeholder communications and the stakeholder relationships, you'll get an understanding of what some of those stakeholders' needs and wants are, and you can customize your communication to their needs and wants. And those are types of applications that I've seen that have made a difference with how internal audit is being perceived. Some cases.
Yeah, I think I would add to that, and I'm I guess a big believer in those of you who I've had the chance to work with, on a QA. I think pictures paint 1,000 words. So to the extent that you can incorporate graphics into your communications to highlight concepts. In periodic reporting to senior management and the board, as well as for engagement reports, I think that is a more effective way of communication. And like I said, it really paints a picture. I think the other thing, and the new standards, highlight this in some of the communication aspects. I like when organizations present themes. Especially for organizations with multiple locations, and you can learn, you can get the whole organization better from an audit or a couple audits done in some locations. So don't be afraid to incorporate themes. Here's what we see. Different ways we can get better based upon what we've seen in some other organizations. So I think that I would add those two concepts.
Okay, get resolution. So ensure management addresses audit issues. The worst thing that we used to see was when things got recycled over and over again. Make sure that they come to closure. Make sure there's a robust follow-up process and the issues get resolved. And again, don't get caught recycling previous issues. But the main thing I think here is just making sure that things get resolved. So I'll let Basil take this one first, and then Martin, you go.
Yeah, I would say, one, make sure you have a process, and make sure you have it documented in your methodologies or your internal audit manual, and make sure that your stakeholders, your audit committee, and your senior management are aligned with that. So everybody's of the same and mutual understanding in terms of if I make a commitment to do this at this point in time, here's what I need to do. Here's what the expectation is. I think, getting that alignment in setting expectations and then making sure that it's documented appropriately, is the foundation for an effective, follow-up process. The last point I would make is, ultimately, management is responsible for, committing to getting something done. That does not, in my mind, preclude internal audit from offering some suggestions in terms of how an observation might be addressed. As long as you're not making the actual decision in terms of this is what's going to happen, I think you should always feel free to share your insights and thoughts. Management ultimately has to make that decision, but don't be afraid to do that.
Okay, Martin, anything to add on that one?
100%, Basil. And again, the communication aspect is key here, and getting the buy-in from management in terms, if you make suggestions, get that buy-in from management, and agree to the actions. The moment that there's an agreement as to something that needs to be done in order to address a risk, and if management understands that there is a risk and that something needs to be done, then that agreement becomes something that they want to make a difference, a process as to how they want to make a difference again in the organization. So make sure that there is an agreement. A lot of those things that has been outstanding on a follow-up register for months and years are things that doesn't really make an impact. It's probably something that we might have missed the boat somewhere along the line. So nitpicking on those types of things becomes a bother to management as well.
Okay, great. And document everything along the way. Now, I have a good question that just came in. It says that in the new version of the standards, there's nothing mentioned about agile auditing. And I think that's an approach that we used to call it stop and go auditing. So how would you guys feel about that if a department's using agile auditing or stop and go auditing in their process? So I'll let Martin go first on this.
Thank you, Warren. There has been a discussion in a lot of internal audit functions for the past 2 or 3 years already in terms of how do you approach agile auditing and still conform to the standards. I mean, the standards aren't set up in such a rigid way that you won't be able to conform to the standards. You just need to build these types of approaches into your methodologies. And when a CAE makes a decision or in consultation with stakeholders that the agile approach would be the best approach for this type of engagement, then by all means, there shouldn't be a reason why they shouldn't go about that. But again, the methodologies needs to set out those types of approaches.
Absolutely agree with Martin on this one. I think that, what we do is internal audit. It's not rocket science. You plan it, you do it, you report it, and you follow up. I think that, one of the things that the new standards does a good job of, and they describe it as, the responsibility of the chief audit executive to establish methodologies. Somewhat of a new term, but, I think understandable. I think if you're taking an approach, an agile approach to planning and execution and reporting, document it as part of your methodology so that, on a going forward basis, there's sustainability and consistency in terms of how you approach it. The other thing, to the extent that you can incorporate some of those methodologies, albeit agile or others, into your electronic work papers, that further supports consistency and sustainability. So that's what I add. I don't think what we do precludes agile auditing at all. I think so some of those concepts are really good, and they may not work for every organization, but for those that want to employ them, just make sure you get them documented in terms of how you're going to apply it.
Great, good question. Thank you. All right. Okay. The last thing is tell it like it is. So when there's an unacceptable risk, you got to tell it. You just can't whitewash it. You got to go through it. And then the other thing is pick which battles you fight, because you don't want to pick the wrong battle to fight. And whatever you do, make sure that you're clear and everything is documented. So, Martin, I'll give you this one to go first and see what you can add on the QA front.
Well, yes, this is one of those aspects where you'd like to focus on when you review your documentations and the processes within the internal audit functions, whether they try and beat around the bush in terms of softening up certain things, but courage is what you need in these situations. When there's a real issue that could impact the organization, tell it like it is. Be straightforward, be concise, be to the point, and highlight what the real issues are. Don't, if you try to hide the real issue or try to soften the real issue, you most likely miss the causes of those issues, and you will make recommendations that is not aligned to the reasons why the risk could materialize. And those are the approaches that needs to be straightforward, be courageous. And don't be afraid of management in terms of that it's to make a difference to the organization at the end of the day. My mom always said, "You're not here to make friends." So
I think one of the really good aspects is the new standard on courage. I think that first of all you need to make sure your facts are right. And, as internal auditors, we always ought to be doing that. And if we need to, go down another layer, if we need to add another, week to our process to make sure our facts are right, especially in a troublesome observation, let's get it right. And part of that, in my mind, is understanding context. Okay, this is the fact, but, what sort of context? And you don't get that without understanding the perspective of some of the key stakeholders to the process. I think, I once had a wise mentor of mine say, bad news doesn't get better with age. So make sure that you're communicating, and there's ways to do that. And that's part of, making sure your facts are right. But, telling it like it is, that's what helps the organization get better. And some things are not very controversial. People already know them. And even some of those tough ones, I'll be surprised if people don't know them or aren't, they're not surprised by it. But, have the strength of your convictions. I think that's ultimately what it's all about as professionals within the internal auditing function.
Okay, we had a question. Polling question. Okay, when do you plan to be in conformance with the new standards? Prior to 25, in 25, beyond 25, or I guess not planning? So that's our polling question right here. For some reason, I can't see it on my screen. Martin, Basil, do you guys see it?
I don't see it.
Oh, there it is. It came up. Thank you. Okay. Let's see what we got. Okay. All right. Not too bad. Getting a little better. Very good. We got almost 86% planning either prior or in 25. 12% beyond 25. So that's not too bad. You guys have any thoughts on that? I guess you're happy, Martin, about that.
Absolutely. I think the beyond 2025, the EQAs are probably only due beyond 2025. They might have had one in the past year or two. So their EQAs will only be due in 26, 27 maybe. So I'm happy that everyone is looking at actually conforming. As an auditor, though, I would want to focus on those 91 responses of 2% that says not planning to be in conformance.
Well, that's true, just like those that are not doing the QAs. So,
but yeah.
Basil,
So I would add this, and you use this as a springboard to just some parting thoughts. I think that in my opinion, there's probably four or five activities that have to take place in 2024 as we get ready for 25. One, people need to become familiar with what's in the new standards, and attending seminars such as we had last month, attending this, going to conferences, taking advantage of the resources that are available on the IA website and in other places is in my mind critical to laying the foundation for understanding what the new standards are, the implications, and how they affect us. I think that there's some certain activities that need to take place in 2024. I mentioned a few of them already, but bottom line, let's everybody start thinking about getting our charters aligned with the new standards. Two, let's make sure that our quality assurance and improvement programs are in place. Three, let's make sure that strategic planning is developed and aligned with the organization, and that we have the initiatives that make sense to help us be more effective as internal audit functions. And then last but not least, and this is about consistency and sustainability, let's make sure that we have the methodologies that are aligning with the new standards documented, so that we can be consistent and sustainable with what we're doing.
Okay.
And just to add on to that, Basil, I would also add another layer to that, to say that line up a training session, or at least an information session, to your board/audit committees in terms of the new standards, and specifically domain 3 and the, I want to say, enhanced role that is going to be required from their sides as well.
All right, great. So as far as the last section, because we're running short on time, I have a list of all the common observations in your material. So from my standpoint, we covered pretty much all of these in our discussion. And the last polling question: do you feel the new standards will have an impact on the quality of your audit services? Yes. The decline, none, additional guidance. So let's hit that. Okay. 65%. Okay, in the last minute, Mark, do you have any comments on this? And then I'll wrap it up, and then Basil, quick final thoughts.
I'm very happy to see the results, and that people takes these new standards so positively and believe that they will make a difference. I think the entire standards board will be happy with these results, as this was the intention of the new standards, to improve internal audit functions and to have them have a bigger impact on their organizations and helping in enhancing the value of organizations overall.
Okay, Basil, quick final thoughts.
No, I think you already shared them, and thank you for allowing me to provide a few thoughts to the process. So we'll continue to get better.
Okay, so just a couple of resources on the QR code. The new Insights to Quality is out. I mentioned before. It's attached to the Resource Center. And then just if you have any questions on the standards or quality services, this is the website. You can shoot an email to us or take the QR code and get to our information. So this concludes our webcast today. It's honored to be presenting with such distinguished cast here, Martin and Basil. I won't add up the experience they have, but I think we had some really good information, and I hope that there was value from what came out today. We're going to display the post-event survey to you. If you can't see it, please go to the resource tab on your console where we locate the survey link. There'll be more to follow, and I want to thank everybody for attending and allowing us to present to you, and hopefully everybody got some valuable information from our two esteemed hosts here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Warren, and everyone.